We're incredibly excited here at HIFF to be relaunching the New American Perspectives program in collaboration with the Vilcek Foundation, and to be able to present and celebrate the work of 5 extraordinary female directors. Before we start the proceedings for today, I'd like to invite Shane Witharana from the Vilcek Foundation to just say a few words about the New American Perspectives program.
Aloha, and thank you all for joining us here today. As Duncan mentioned, we are thrilled to relaunch the New American Perspectives program this year. And our mission at the Vilcek Foundation is to raise awareness for immigrant contributions to the arts and sciences. And one way we achieve this goal is by partnering with amazing organizations like HIFF. And so this year, the films and presentations that are offered through the New American Perspectives programs centers the voices of 5 groundbreaking artists whose work deftly covers themes of identity, belonging, and self-discovery. And so we're so thrilled that we could have them participate with us today. And so without further ado, I'll turn it back to Duncan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An apology beforehand. Anna Page, our extraordinary director of programming, was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately she's unwell. So I've had to step in. My apologies. I hope you can put up with me. But now I'd like to celebrate the extraordinary voices for our panel. Haifaa Al-Mansour is the first female filmmaker in Saudi Arabia. The success of her 3 short international acclaim of her award-winning 2005 documentary, Women Without Shadows, influenced a new wave of Saudi filmmakers. Al-Monsour's acclaimed 2012 film Wajda received numerous awards and accolades at festivals around the world. In 2017, Al-Monsour released Mary Shelley, starring Elle Fanning and Douglas Booth. In 2018, she released the Netflix film Napoli Ever After, starring Sanaa Lathan. She recently directed an episode of an untitled Chris Kaiser series, scheduled to debut on Netflix in 2019, and an episode of The Good Lord Bird for Showtime. Her latest film, The Perfect Candidate, had a phenomenal debut at both Venice and Toronto Film Festival this year, and we're extremely proud to be presenting it later today. Please welcome Haifaa Al-Mansour. HIKARI is a writer, director, and cinematographer with a professional background as an actor, dancer, and photographer. Her directorial debut, short film Suyako, screened at over 60 film festivals worldwide, including HIFF, winning 38 awards and 2 nominations, including Best International Short Film at 2 Academy Award qualified film festivals. 37 Seconds is her feature film debut, premiering this year at the Berlin Film Festival to much critical acclaim. HIFF is honoured to welcome HIKARI to this year's film festival, where she was also awarded the Kaukahoku Emerging Filmmaker Award last night. Please welcome HIKARI. Jenny Dorsey is a professional and artist specialising in multi-platform storytelling fusing food with social good. She leads a non-profit studio named Studio Atau and runs her own culinary consulting business. Her food and work has been profiled in outlets such as Eater, Business Insider, Food and Wine, Oxygen TV, and Now This, and showcased her Asian in America dinner VR experience at this year's festival. Please welcome Jenny. Emily Ting's latest feature, Go Back to China, starring Anna Akana, premiered in competition at this year's South by Southwest Film Festival. Her first feature, Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong, starring Jamie Chung and Brian Greenberg, premiered at the Los Angeles Film Festival. Emily is previously known for producing the films The Kitchen, A Year and Change, Land Ho, Pit Stop, and Man from Reno. She most recently produced Lin Chen's directorial debut, I Will Make You Mine. So please welcome Emily. Final extraordinary talent rounding off our wonderful panel tonight is Isabel Sandoval. Isabel is a New York-based Filipino filmmaker and MacDowell Fellow film. She's the first transgender director to compete at the Venice and BFI film festivals. Her 3 dramatic features, Señorita, Apparition, and Lingua Franca, have competed and screened at prestigious international film festivals including Locarno, Busan, Thessalonica, Stockholm, Gothenburg, Hamburg, Vancouver, Goa, and Hawaii. Her work has been supported by the Tribeca Film Institute, SF Film, the New York Film Academy, Foundation for the Arts, MOME, IFP, and Frameline. Please welcome Isabel. I suppose the place that I'd like to start the panel at today is you're coming from a variety of disciplines, a variety of experiences. I'm wondering if you could briefly describe what your creative process is, what your creative practice is, and how you approach the process of filmmaking. And if we could start with Haifaa.
For the creative process always starts with the character. I think making a film is always, it's amazing with all it is sound design and production and everything. But if you don't have this character that kind of speaks to you, it does not really land with people. And for me, I always try to connect with the person that I'm telling their stories, and it unlocks everything for me. So it always starts with the character.
Feel free to keep going.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna start singing air guitar. Hello, everybody. I can't play guitar to save my life. But anyway, hi, thank you so much for being here, and thank you again, HIFF and Vilcek Foundation. It's been amazing. Well, I guess there's a few things. Characters definitely very important, because without the great characters, I feel like the movie is, you're just kind of watching what kind of, that's how I feel. For me, the story, sometimes I get inspired from a photograph to just a moment with talking to somebody, or sometimes I'll be sleeping and I wake up and this story comes to me. So those are things that I just kind of try to capture, remember, write it down, and then from that, I just kind of start doing a research, to talking to people again, to again wait for those moments that comes to me. Kind of mix of everything, but definitely once I have this solid idea and the characters that I'm really drawn to, I will just basically listen to what the character wants to speak and what she wants to do or he wants to do, and then from that I create the surrounding stories.
So I am not exactly a filmmaker. Sorry for being here. So I'll talk about my creative process as a way as I'm a professional chef. So I think about how I can use food to do something more than have people eat and enjoy themselves. I think very fundamentally we're constantly sold this lie that food brings people together, and if you're like simply sitting next to each other at a table, somehow you're gonna like become really chummy and share your deep dark secrets with each other, and that's just not true. I think we all know that, but PR wants to tell us a different story. So my mission has always been, how do you use food to create some sort of discomfort so that you can have people actually walk away from the table and either have their worldview change or have a specific action that they would perhaps want to do after leaving, and how can you use food specifically do that, and how can you have other aspects of art complement the food and bring it forward, because a lot of times people do see food as background noise, or it's something that's only meant to make you feel good, and I don't think that you progress as a person. I don't think you change as a person. I don't think you improve as a person by feeling comfortable or good. I don't want you to feel bad, but I guess are supposed to feel discomfort. And so we have incorporated virtual reality in Asian America, which we were very, very fortunate to not debut, but to host at HIFF this year. And I think one of the points of the evening is that throughout the experience, there's multiple courses of food that talk about the Asian American identity, and it makes people feel uncomfortable, and that prompts them to have conversations with each other. And when guests come up to me afterwards, they're like, this specifically made me feel a certain way. I want to go home, I don't want to think about it, and I want to do X or Y. And then I know I've done my job.
So I have now directed 2 features. The first one is called Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong, and the second one that's at HIFF right now is called Go Back to China. Both of my features come from very personal places. They're both semi-autobiographical. So for me, the 2 opportunities I got to direct, I sort of mined from my own personal experiences to try to tell a very universal story. And for me, it's a privilege to get to make a film, and I was not making it for a studio system or with sort of commercial aspects in mind. On a very selfish level, it was a very cathartic experience for me to make both films, and those were sort of the inspirations I had. But I wanted to also create very universal stories that everyone could kind of relate to, and this is what I think, coming from an immigrant background to especially when you work on the indie level, tell the stories that only you could tell and no one else can. Don't try to go after like, oh, well, what will appeal to the four quadrants? You know, because we're not making films at that level. When we're making a Marvel film, it's a different landscape and story. But, you know, when we're making small independent films, you know, my inspiration always comes from, you know, the stories that I want to tell, I want to see, and that's like sort of mined from my own personal experiences.
In my case, since, you know, Lingua Franca is actually my third dramatic feature, but it is my first feature after my gender transition, and it's my first to be set in and produced in the US. You know, I've noticed that, you know, I'm drawn to, you know, a singular thematic obsession or fixation. I feel like, you know, artists and filmmakers tend to, you know, we end up making the same movie over and over in some sense. And I certainly noticed that in the retrospectives of the directors that I admire. And for me, I think the theme that interests me most, or that I go back to, is, you know, disadvantaged women who are forced to make intensely personal choices in the context of a very particular socio-political milieu. And that sometimes that tends to be an adversarial or hostile setting. For example, in Lingua Franca, it's about an undocumented Filipino trans woman who is trying to pursue a path to legal, you know, citizenship during the Trump administration. And so when I come up with stories, and the thing with me is I don't run out of ideas or new concepts. It's a matter of really, you know, focusing on one and committing to one and developing that.
I suppose one running theme through all of your responses is this importance of human connection. Whatever the medium is, it's about creating that emotional or human response between people. And I suppose you're all immigrant filmmakers. Do you feel that the experience of immigration heightens your sensitivity to those sorts of encounters? How does the experience of being an immigrant affect the way that you, as an artist, understand the importance of human connection?
Well, for me, I felt like coming from Saudi Arabia and was offered Mary Shelley as the second film after I made a film in Saudi Arabia. And Mary Shelley is a very white British woman. It's so different, and it's period. I was really surprised. I was like, I don't know what they're thinking. So I took the script, and I really, I enjoyed it. And I felt there is a lot of commonality where women, like England is nothing like Saudi Arabia, but at the time, women were expected to act in a certain way and there's a lot of tradition, and women's voices are not as respected as men's. I felt very much personally drawn to the character because it reminded me a lot of experiences I had. So every time, and that is how I approach filmmaking, as coming from a world that is different than America or the US or the Western world, is to find that commonality, find where we can be together. Because our experiences somehow, maybe there is always a shared thing, a thread. And once you find that, it is really amazing how much you bring from home and how much you take. And I think the immigration is not only us bringing things, but also being part of a bigger culture, and that is rewarding. Is like to see yourself like contributing to a culture and also embracing it. So so I think it is it is amazing to find those commonalities and work around them and find yourself in those things.
For me, 37 Seconds was my first feature film, so I'm very behind of these veteran amazing directors. But the story that I created this time, and a few things that I made before too, I often put my experience or thoughts as who I am, and just put that into the characters' voices. And it's interesting because I am an immigrant in the United States, but I felt like I was more foreign when I was in Japan. So it was important for me to go away from my own country, and then now I'm here I'm an immigrant, but I'd say at the same time I feel so much more comfortable in my own skin. So in a sense, when I was writing this script, and this movie is set in Japan and in Tokyo, and the girl with the cerebral palsy, and so it kind of went back to my time when I was in Japan, how I felt about being very alien, living in that society. So definitely being here in England is helped me to become who I am. But it was a very interesting process that I went through with that.
One of the themes that Asian America specifically, but I think just one of the concepts that my studio explores a lot is this concept of shame. And I think a lot of immigrants especially carry that around with them, and it manifests in different ways. And throughout the 6-course meal of Asian America, we talk about that throughout a couple of the courses. But I bring this up because I think because that's such an essential part of the immigrant experience, we do think about that and we internalize it in different ways. And one of the things that has been helpful for me as an immigrant, as well as I think a lot of my minority friends, is having a safe space where you do not feel shame. And one of the interesting things, and again, part of our mission is how do we create a safe space where people who are not Asian American, who don't have the lived experience that we are talking about, do not feel shame in asking questions, because everybody wants to be woke these days. Everybody is worried about cancel culture, and one of the problems that I think divides people from being a truly good ally is that they're too ashamed to ask questions, and they don't actually know what's going on, and then they perhaps say something that's insensitive. They truly didn't mean it, but then they feel shameful, and many times our reaction to shame is anger, and to actually then to push that person away that made us feel shameful, perhaps an immigrant, perhaps a woman, and then turn it on like we hate them, they did something wrong to me. And our whole ethos is how do we bring those two sorts of people together to talk about things in an environment where there is no wrong questions. There's only, as long as you ask open-ended questions, it's no one's job to make their culture accessible to you. It is your job to ask the right questions. But if you do, then you will not feel shamed. And I think there's this nice way of being able to, because immigrants so innately understand that concept, we can really create the space for them properly, and hopefully create more allies at the end of the meal.
So I think one of the things about being an immigrant is you naturally develop this outsider's perspective, because when you don't have the luxury to be part of the majority and you grew up as a minority, I feel like that gives you more empathy, because you're constantly in pop culture and everything, and I think like the tides is finally changing now, but for 20, 30 years when I was growing up in America, I watched white couples falling in love on screen and white families, and to me I could relate, but yet I found a way to relate to those family sitcoms, and I found a way to relate to those love stories, even though they don't look like me. And I think it's because innately you just develop this empathy for a culture that's not your own when you are in the minority. And I think that's a very important skill to have when you are a filmmaker, is to be able to find that empathy. I think like what Haifaa said, even though, I might be Chinese American, but I could tell a story of a British white woman, or because you find the commonality and the universality. And I think, having been a minority, I feel like I've been trained my whole life to kind of see things from other people's perspective.
I think in my film work, I feel like the essence or the idea of being an immigrant or being the other very much substantially informs my films, in that my films are essentially dramas of dislocation and displacement. They're consistently about the conflict and the tension between the main protagonist and the setting that she is part of. But in Lingua Franca, it's the first time that I directly and literally focus the story on immigrants. A lot of, audience members tend to focus on the relationship between Olivia, the trans woman, and Alex, the Russian Jewish slaughterhouse worker. but quite a few, and I'm impressed that you noticed that another important relationship is between Olivia and Olga, the 80-something Russian Jewish woman with dementia that she's looking after. And they're essentially mirror characters. Both of them are immigrants to the United States. And Olga immigrated to the US about 50 years ago, while Olivia, we migrated more recently. But it's that kind of connection and the kind of empathy that I want to draw out in my films. A lot more in that, when you think about it, films about people in the United States are for the most part stories about immigrants, of different generations.
One theme which keeps popping up is universality, and universality as opposed to foreignness. I wonder if you could speak briefly on this concept of foreignness, particularly in the current political environment. To be foreign is to be alien, to be dangerous, and to be at risk. How do you relate and think about this concept of foreignness or to be a foreigner? How do you relate to that in your own work?
Yeah, I mean, that was, that kind of situation was very, hit very close to home for me when making lingua franca, because in 2016, of course, Trump was elected president, and at that time I was really feeling vulnerable and quite threatened. There was a lot of anxiety and tension and depression, and I think that was a common feeling, for a lot of minorities. And I actually decided to shelve the film for about 6 months. And that's when my producers, who are also Filipino immigrants like myself, was telling me or asking me, don't you think that this is, the perfect time to be making a movie like Lingua Franca? And they're right. And that made me realize that even though, as minority artists and filmmakers, sometimes we could feel isolated, or alienated from a machinery like, or a system like Hollywood, there are other minority and immigrant artists and filmmakers just like ourselves that are willing to support our vision, and our talent. And that's what essentially happened with me. And one of my producers, Carlo Vileo, is here and has helped me make a movie like Lingua Franca.
Should we just go back this way? Well, my film is called Go Back to China, which is probably the quintessential insult you could hurl at an immigrant. Go back to where you come from because you don't belong here. So, my film is a little bit of a play on that because it's not really a film about race relations in America. That was sort of the inciting incident. I just thought, the movie is literally about a girl who goes back to China and sort of discovers herself. But the inciting incident comes from being told to go back to where she came from by a racist woman on the streets. And I thought it was interesting in that, she's Chinese American, she grew up in America, but on the surface, she is the other, she is the foreigner, go back to where you come from. And something totally unrelated to that incident, she does go back to her homeland, but ends up feeling, I think like HIKARI touched upon, feeling more like a foreigner and an alien in her homeland. And that is a theme that I've explored in both of my films now, in the first one, and also in Go Back to China, because even though I was, born in Asia, but I grew up here in America, and like every time I've gone back to Asia, I feel more like an alien over there. But here in America, there are still people who feel like I don't belong, that I need to go back to where I come from. So it's really interesting. I think it's similar to what you touched upon earlier. It's this sort of like struggling with your identity almost, like where exactly do I fit in? And also sort of the idea of home, like what does home mean to you? Is it here where you grew up or where your ancestors come from? So those are things that I played with in both of my features now.
I think one of the interesting things about foreignness is how when people react to it, what is this like immediate reaction or visceral reaction? I think no one wants to sit around and be like, I'm racist actually, but so many people inherently you have unconscious bias, and I like to play with that idea with food on actually making something, whether it elicits a feeling of disgust and kind of making them sit with that and examining why they feel that way. Many times people look at something foreign and they're like, ugh, it's gross. And they've never eaten it before. Like, how can you tell me that uni is gross? You've literally never tried it. And I think that's the interesting, that's the question that we have to pose at dinner, like in someone's face. I also like to examine the concept of foreignness by taking, like having the white majority see foreignness from the Asian perspective. So for example, one of the courses in Asian in America is called substitutions. And I take concepts of dishes. One of them is chanwanmushi, and one is which is a Japanese egg custard, if people aren't familiar, and one of them is a namprik, which is a Thai kind of like spicy dipping sauce. And I substitute out so many of the basic ingredients and then present it in a way that's essentially completely, it doesn't look right, it doesn't taste right, it does not resemble the initial product or the initial title at all, but I call it that on the menu and then I serve it, and obviously the Asian people who are familiar with it, I'm like, what? There's literally a funny video of this guy like looking at this chawanmushi, which I make with brie, like the cheese. I pump it in something called a whipping siphon, charge it with nitrogen, and it comes out as a really fluffy foam on the plate, and this guy's like looking at it like this. And it's that concept of that is foreign to him, because it's not chawanmushi, but many times when Chipotle calls something barbacoa, and then we think that is barbacoa, to Mexicans they're like, that's not barbacoa. Like being able to deal with the duality of that and actually kind of talk about it through food is, I think that's really interesting.
Well, I think people are like, the concept, it is about clash of values. If you have, comes to values that you bring different from home, different, and the way you look, the food you have, and all that, and people being afraid of the unknown. That's true, and I think it's always feeling being foreign and alone. It is a scary thing, so I think it is very important to open up. And it is very important to have people see that you have shared values of honesty, integrity, working hard. And once people see that, and there is trust, there is a lot of things that the concept of foreignness can shatter. It cannot shatter only because we think other people have to respect us because we are different and we are minorities and stuff like that. Also, as a minority, we have to open up. Also, as a minority, we have to be part of a bigger culture. And it is a question, especially coming from a Muslim culture, we don't integrate very well because of a lot of people. Definitely, there are stereotypes and there's politics and there's a lot of things around our culture and the Western culture and clashes of religion and really a lot of things. But the only thing that we can move forward, and so we enjoy each other's food and everything, is to understand there are fundamental values that we need to all embrace. And those fundamental values are hopefully in every culture. And maybe sometimes we need to learn. I am as an Arab, we don't work really hard, I have to say. We smoke coffee and talk. When it comes to working, we don't have work ethics. Once we go to America, who is workaholic, people expect us to come on time. Yes, sharp, not half an hour late. So things like this, learning those values, it is very important. And also it is fun because we are fun people. We dance, we love food. If you come to an Arab party, you will have the best time in your life. So there is something that we can bring to the culture, but also we need to learn from it and have those shared values. And that bring us, again, we can enjoy our own food and we can enjoy everything, but if we have those shared values of integrity, honesty, working hard, and things like that, we will stick as humans together, and foreignness will be like whatever,
That's cool. I want to go to your party.
You're most welcome. What happens in the party stays in the party.
All right, I'm fine with that. For me, I guess when I first came to America, I was 18, and I went to high school in Utah. I was the only Asian girl. There's no black, no Mexican, no Arab. And it was a Caucasian group of 99% Caucasian, and this Tongan, and me. And it was so out there that I didn't even imagine, but I kind of tried to make it as part of my life and enjoyment. So me being foreigner or having the concept of foreign, I played with it so much because some people just come up and say, how do you use chopsticks? I've never seen it before. It's like, all right, this is how you use it. Right, exactly. But that was like the norm. So I think in that sense, I learned how to play with my differences and my ethnic background. And then, just kind of play with it. So for me, concept of foreign is so far beyond like everything at the same time. For me, they're the foreign too, because they're foreign to, like what she was saying, foreign to the chopsticks, So, and copy on what she's saying, like just understand each other, and then here we go, we can hold hand each other, and then we learn from each other. And I think that's something that as a foreigner can provide to people, and vice versa. So that's kind of yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I suppose as a follow-up to that, for the people on this panel who have made films in other countries, what are the challenges in making films outside of the US? Is there anything that's easier about working in your home country or in a different space?
Well, it is easy working in America because once you have money, which never comes, and it's very private, like money and funding films in America is very difficult. But once you do a film here, there is a wheel, like there is a machine, and people are really, really efficient. You have very wonderful crew, actors, and are very well trained and all that. So it is such a privilege to be in a Western set. Really, like you really have the best of everything around you. Even with a limited budget independent film, you attract a lot of talent. Going back home is different. Going back home is like you don't have a lot of talent, but a lot of heart and a lot of amazing stories. Like talent, I mean like trained people, not talent in that sense, but a lot of training. There is no training, so you try to bring in a lot of like what you learn to bridge the gap and to train people there. So it is very exciting. It is very exhausting working back home. I just finished a film called The Perfect Candidate. And it is about a Saudi woman who runs for politics. And it is like, I was inspired, like Hillary Clinton did, why? Let's go women. We have to have women more in politics and we have to empower women. So it is an idea I got by being here. And I wanted to bring it back home, like to bring an idea like to promote women in politics and have the space for them to have their own voices. But yeah, it is, and we had to train a lot of people. We had to and because it's a different way of doing film and TV there. It is kind of, so it is bringing back it was almost like, yeah, the story is really amazing. You can find a lot of amazing stories back home it's very inspiring and untold, and really a place where people there is excitement and curiosity about the place. So you want to bring that and you want to tell it. So, yeah.
So I made a bunch of short films before, and I made 4 shorts and commercials and then feature film that I shot most of them in Japan, except for one, which I shot in Utah. But even though I'm Japanese and I've shot a lot in Japan, I learned everything how to make filmmaking in America. And then I worked as a DP as well, so I'm so used to working on American set. So when I go back to Japan, if it's a short film, I try to get all the people who had the experience in the United States and be my cinematographer and whatnot, so they can work with me. But this for feature film, it was very different. I think there's, like she said, there's a lot of heart in Japan. Like Japanese crew they care so much about the story. Just a sample of it is the first AD. First AD, second ADs, they love the story so much and they get so into it, but they don't time manage sometimes. So they forget, or they want me to do what I really want like to do, and then realize that wow, I have so many shots left and I have an hour left, you know. So I kind of have to time manage at the same time. Yeah, it's been. I think there's a great, good and bad. I guess professionalism in the United States is just like far beyond. It's like a machine.
Yeah.
Everything's on time. You have to do it within 12 hours. Otherwise, you pay overtime. In Japan, you can, you know, I mean, we won't do it, but some people shoot for 24 hours and, you know, finish one feature film in one day. So things like that. It's
See, I'm surprised. There is something between Japanese and Saudis. we think Japanese are the best in like the line, assembling the line and efficiency here, but I never thought that.
Yeah, so it's been a very different, and then the business itself is different. Japan, they make 600 movies a year. There's independent and, you know, studio movies, but then not very many movies leaves the country because there's not really much of money backing, or people don't. They make movies, but they don't have money to submit to festivals, and, you know. Whereas here, you know, you kind of keep that in the budget, and you make sure that your film go farther than what your family group, right? So just the thought process is different. So what I'm trying to do is to kind of mix those two together and kind of educate, you know, Japanese people, filmmakers, into how to kind of collaborate and learn the professional way and make good movies.
So I've now directed 2 features, and both of them were shot in Asia. The first one was shot, Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong was all shot in Hong Kong, and the second one, Go Back to China, was shot, some of it in Hong Kong and most of it in China. And it's been a very interesting experience. You know, in Go Back to China, I had 5 days in Los Angeles, and the rest of the time was in China. And the experience was very different. And it might be even a little different, I guess, than your experience. I come from the indie world, so I probably have the lowest budget out of everyone's films here. I don't know. I'm only guessing because we have so little money. And ironically, I was able to get crew for cheaper in Los Angeles than overseas. And that's something, you know, I feel like my producer, Sophia, could maybe speak more to that. The crew we had in Asia was very, very good. They're very professional. I mean, on my first film, I mean, even the PAs, they were by far the most, like, they were the best PAs I've ever worked with, because they PA for, like, Wong Kar-wai movies, and, you know, they're very professional. I think the difference is really in sort of like this micro-budget indie world. In LA, there's so many of these micro-budget movies being made, and I think there's so many people who come to LA with a dream, and they will work, you know, for cheap just so that they could get on a movie set and get that IMDb credit and work for you. And when our movie got into South by, you know, the whole crew was like, oh my God, we did it. We made a movie for so little money, and we got into South by. Over in Asia, at least the experience I had on the 2 features, and I think this again comes back to this foreignness. Even though I'm Chinese and I'm from Asia, a lot of them were treating me like a foreign director. So whereas they might, you know, cut a deal with a local filmmaker, they do not see me as a local filmmaker. So they would just charge me whatever their normal rate is, which is always sort of higher than the sort of indie rate. Because like in LA, it's the same thing. People have their rate and they have their indie rate. You know, a lot of our crew members probably work on commercials and other things to subsidize, but when you have an indie film, they're like, oh, indie film, will do it for, you know, minimum wage, basically. Over there, I just feel like it was a little harder just because I'm coming from America. So outside of production, where I found frustration was in sort of the reception of the film. So I'm Asian American, I'm Chinese American, I grew up in America, but both of my films, I went back to my homeland to shoot the movies. But the films have all been received very, very well in American film festivals across the board. And I think it's because both stories, even though they're set in Asia, they're told from the Asian American perspective. They have not done well any of the Asian film festivals. It's been really hard for us to get into, like, we could not get into the Hong Kong Film Festival, you know, twice. And the first movie was basically a love letter to Hong Kong. We found a lot of resistance with the Asian film festivals and also with Hong Kong and Chinese distributors. People think like, oh, you made a movie called Go Back to China. It's all set in China and it stars a really well-known Chinese actor. You're going to have no problem finding distribution in China. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's been very easy for us to find distribution in North America, but quite an uphill battle in China. And funny enough, like my film is called Go Back to China. And originally we thought we might run into an issue with a North American distributor, like, oh, that's too, like political, we don't want to touch that. We have not had any issues. It's in China and Hong Kong that all of a sudden we have to change the title. It's now too political, it's too hotbed. So, in a way, like I feel like my films, even though they are set and shot in Asia, are more embraced here because it's told from the Asian American perspective. Just like Crazy Rich Asians, did gangbusters here, but bombed in China, because it comes from the perspective, like, oh, that's a very American story. They don't care that it's set in Singapore or my movies are set in China and Hong Kong. So I think that's one really telling way of the differences.
In my experience, there's a different layer and complexity, complication to my experience of shooting in America versus my home country in the Philippines. And I think shooting Lingua Franca in New York, this is my first time directing a film as a woman. And, I definitely felt, the sense of otherness or being foreign. I felt like an immigrant in a male-dominated set in some sense. So whereas in my previous two films, I didn't feel like, people were questioning, or were skeptical of my creative choices and decisions. I felt that when I was shooting Lingua Franca. And, especially, I was wearing multiple hats. I was the writer and director. I also acted in the film, and in post, I was the one who cut my film. It was constantly, in a way, kind of an exhausting and stressful process. On a day-to-day basis, and I didn't really feel that until we wrapped production. I was like, wow, that really took a lot out of me emotionally. But, it was very important to me that I was able to really, pursue the vision that I wanted for the film. And so it was really quite a vindicating feeling for me when the film got accepted to a festival like Venice, and that validated, my work and the effort that I put in and my talent as well. But also in a different way, when I showed Lingua Franca in the Philippines about a month ago, and that was my first time back in the Philippines, my home country, in 6 years, and my first time to go back there after my transition, it was a strange and bewildering experience because having lived in New York for the last 14 years, I have never felt self-conscious about being transgender. Maybe in the beginning, but not in the last 5 years. But when I went back home, that was the first time, the Philippines is a very, very Catholic country. And that was the first time, I became aware, of being trans, which is an unsettling feeling to have in your own home country. And it made me realize that, having lived in the US for, a decade and a half, is it becoming home to me now more than my own home country? And I feel like as immigrants, there's always kind of that period or that phase when you're starting to feel more at home in this new place that was strange when you first got there than the one that you were born and raised in, just because you've evolved and grown and changed so much.
I have so many questions, but I do need to keep to time. I suppose, how, on a level of identity, do you relate to the place in which you were born? And how do you relate that to your current life in the US?
I'm very Saudi. But I feel very American as well. I feel it is, I'm like I invite my American friends to eat Saudi food and they love it, and I cook their food and I enjoy the 4th of July barbecue and like every kind of occasion is very important. Thanksgiving is big in our house. We do the turkey, which I learned how to do. So I feel, but still, I make a Saudi dish on the side. And it goes really well together. So it is kind of like, I feel, that I still have an accent and I enjoy my food and everything. But and my kids play baseball and softball. I'm learning the rules. Eyes on the ball. I'm being competitive on the dugout with the other moms. So, I think, but I'm Saudi. Like, I bring Saudi snacks sometimes. So it's kind of fun to bridge that culture.
Yeah. Same. When I left Japan, I wanted to be like American, so I tried my best to be American, but I find myself being like so Japanese and playing that Japanese card so much sometimes too, and I make fun of my own culture. I make fun of my accent to whatever, but it just kind of you play. I cook Japanese food. I have to have rice all the time.
Us too. Another thing common between Japanese and rice.
Exactly.
We love rice.
So you just kind of you adapt and you play, and I think it's just part of us in the sense that who we are, and why not make fun of American culture when I'm in Japan, and then make myself fun of my culture when I'm here, or doing the same thing, making fun of my culture in Japan, or just laughing with people about that, and it's all good, right?
So I was born in Shanghai, and I moved to the U.S. when I was 3.5 with my grandparents. So I'm pretty American. Most of when I run into Chinese aunties, they call me ABC, which is American born Chinese. And I'm like, well, actually. So I think for a long time, I wanted to be one of those people who are like, I don't see color, we love that. And so for a long time, that was me. I internalized the racism and so much, and the problems with immigration so much, that I was like, oh, no, it has nothing to do with me. Like, I'm just American. We're American. We love everyone. We're such a melting pot. And we are, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of problems we still need to address. And so I play with that concept a lot in Asian and America. And I think just in a lot of my food in general is like, how do I see the concept of being Chinese? What does China, when I think about China, what do I see? For me, I haven't been back to China since 2007, so my interpretation of what that even looks like is very different from reality. For example, one of my friends who's from Hong Kong but travels around China a lot, she came to me and she worked at an event that we hosted in Manhattan's Chinatown. I don't know if anyone's been to Manhattan's Chinatown recently, but it's not, I would say it's a very desirable and expensive real estate in Manhattan, but it's not perhaps the nicest or cleanest neighborhood. And she's like, oh, it's so dirty here. I mean, China's so much better than this. And I thought that was so subversive and hilarious, kind of like that scene in Crazy Rich Asians. I know there's mixed feelings about that film, where they're like, people in America are starving. I think there's an interesting concept of I might actually see what being Shanghainese as something very different from what people in Shanghai believe that to be. And that doesn't make my opinion not valid, but at the same time, what makes it okay for me to even see that? Just because I'm from there doesn't mean I actually have an accurate depiction of what that is. And being able to, open my own eyes to these a lot of internalized stereotypes that I have of Chinese people, of myself, of immigrants, and being able to express that through my food. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, I think I think both parts of my culture, the Chinese part and the American part, they make up who I am today, and you can't have one without the other. I think when I was growing up in upstate New York, where there's not a lot of other Chinese people, I grew up thinking very much, I'm American, but I think as I got older, and I also, what was different was I was born in Taiwan. I moved to this country when I was 10, and then I, from school all the way up to college, I've lived in America. But in my 20s, I actually moved back to Hong Kong and became not an immigrant, but an expat, because it's glamorous when you move back to Asia from America. You're not called an immigrant, you're called an expat. And I spent 10 years, living in Hong Kong. So it was sort of like a reverse immigration almost, where I went back to the homeland, worked for the family business. So I sort of had I felt like two periods of immigration where, I was an American expat in Asia. And when I was growing up, I was an Asian immigrant in America. And both of those experiences make up who I am today and also really informed. I mean, both movies I made were about those experiences I had in the 10 years I spent living in Asia as an American. So they go hand in hand. And I think as I got older, I've learned to sort of embrace my heritage rather than being maybe a little ashamed of it. Like, oh, I'm American, I'm not Chinese. Like now I feel they're both equally important to who I am today.
For me, I feel like, after having lived outside of the Philippines for, 15 years, I feel like I now have a certain emotional and intellectual distance to be able to really, assess the culture and my background objectively and impartially, and to both, recognize its great aspects and also the more unflattering and unsavory ones. Currently, for instance, politically, the Philippines, our head of state, has quite, a questionable reputation, which is not so different from the United States. And that makes you, I realize that I will always be a product of, where I've come from, being Filipino, and its history is going to be part of me, forever. And I think, the longer that I've lived in the United States, it's not just this simple, or binary question of do I feel more American or more Filipino? Like you said, it becomes, a curious and unique and idiosyncratic combination of that, and to a certain extent, although I feel more at home in New York, there's always going to be part of me that will feel foreign or feeling like a sense of other, just because of the color of my skin. And it's, something that you deal with on a daily basis, I think.
It's an extraordinary privilege as a film festival to have 5 extraordinary women of colour on stage. And so I'm wondering if you could comment briefly on where you feel, as a woman of colour, the industry is at the moment.
Good place. Or starting. Like there's a lot of debate. I get a lot more scripts to read, and I get a lot more meetings, and it's definitely there is a push. Still, we are not there yet, but there is a realization that is the need for the more women filmmakers and more diverse filmmakers, and whether it's color or gender and all kind of, there is a push. Still, we don't get the marvels yet, not all of them, but like Mulan was helmed by a woman, and it is 100 million and above. But I feel more and more the studio system is warming up. I think it's up us to women to take these opportunities and build on our skills and be ready when that moment comes, because it is coming. It is coming when they will ask you to helm a big budget film. Are we ready for it? Do we have the skills and the talent and like the accumulative resume? You have to start from now, feeling that I need to get there. And it's a dream. If it is like 5 years ago, it would have been impossible, because they will never hire a woman of color to do a film like that. But now, yes, there is a possibility. It is not huge, but there is a possibility. If you are focused and you work really hard, there might be a chance. There is a chance. So I think we are on the verge of really good times, hopefully.
No, I 100% agree. I'm still new to this, and I I finished the movie. We premiered in Berlin in February, and I came back in March, and I literally met like 60 people back to back within 3 weeks, and it was all studio executive to everybody, and they just wanted to hear my opinion about things. And no matter who they are, I always talk exactly the same. So I'll say what I think and what I think works for me or as an artist, and then they appreciated it. And again, that would never probably happen 5 years ago, or even when I made 4 short films because I couldn't get funding for my feature script or things that I thought I was passionate about. It was difficult to get money, and whereas all my guy friends are getting money to make the movies. And there's that difference that I saw, even me now just finally starting my career, it feels like. So I think we're in a very, very good period right now.
I won't comment on the film industry since I'm not really in it, but I will say there's an interesting parallel, I think, in film and in food, as women of color, women in general, are trying to find their own place and their voice in the food industry, and kind of finally challenging the really antiquated system like Michelin stars or the world's 50 best and etc. I don't need to go into it. What I think has been really, at least for me, something that I've noticed that I think is really important is that women, finally, women in the industry have stopped trying to just be like men. Mm-hmm. They have embraced that, like, when women cook food, it does look different. It just does taste different and it feels different. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. When women move in the kitchen, they move differently than men. And I think I really noticed this. I competed in a vaguely big deal competition recently, and it was myself and 2 other women, and I was just observing the woman across the table from me, and she came up in an all-male kitchen, very classic school French, and I was like, why is she just banging around the kitchen like that and moving her body so brusquely? Because I usually work by myself, and I work with an all-female team, and we just move differently, and I think so long we have tried to fit ourselves into a male body, into a male role, into a male director's shoes, into a male filmmaker's shoes. We're trying to be, the next whatever male pinnacle you might, or mentor, whoever that you really admired, and we can never be that person. Instead, trying to be like, what can I do to take advantage of what I have? And because the men can never have that, so that's been very interesting for me, and I think that you see parallels in that in a lot of industries that women are coming up.
Yeah, and I agree with what you've said before, which is that it is a pretty good time. And I think, studio executives, they want to meet with you, not, because you are a female filmmaker of color, not in spite of it. In fact, it's like, oh yeah, what stories are you telling next? Like, what are you working on? They're very interested. But I feel like there's this misconception right now that's going around a lot, especially by my white male counterparts. They feel like we are taking their jobs away. And that is a very... yes. Have you been hearing that? Like, I don't know how many times I've heard a white male
can't take their part.
Colleague, like, oh, you're so lucky. You are a woman of color. Everyone wants to meet with you. I can't get signed by an agent because what are they going to do with another white dude?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, maybe you're just not good enough. And your agent is trying to stoke your ego, oh, sorry, the studio doesn't want to meet with you because there's just too many white males right now. And that's a misconception, because if you look at who's still getting the big Marvel movies and the TV episodes, it's still primarily white men. We're just trying to get a place at the table. We're not, I feel like that is just a little microcosm of the bigger question of immigration. Like, oh, you're all coming to take our jobs. Like, no, we're just trying to get on the even playing field. And I really, really hate hearing that. And these are some good friends of mine that I went to film school with, and I cannot believe this is what's coming out of their mouth, and it's very tone-deaf way of thinking.
Yeah, to build on what's been said, I think it's really important, not just to, have these interviews, with studios, and have the job end up going to a, cisgender white male director. I think it's also very important not just to have women of color filmmakers, but also women and women of color decision makers, and producers. We have to have, women of color in the boardroom making these decisions. And for instance, someone like Ava DuVernay, she's not just a director, she's also a producer. And as a result, for her show, Queen Sugar, majority, if not all, of the directors are women. So it's really important that you have women deciding which movies get made and which movies greenlit, because they have the power to decide to have a woman directing the material.
We have some time for audience questions. So,
Hi, thank you for sharing your stories and your journey with us. As a feature filmmaker, video producer, do you have any advice for us of what you've gone through and anything that you've gone through that would help us as a future filmmaker and video producer?
Don't take no for an answer. Knock on those door 100 times. And this is the way. It is a very competitive business. But I think it's very important to be persistent and know where to start. There's a lot of places like Sundance Film Independent, Gotham Awards, and all those, they support young filmmakers. They are on the hunt for new voices. They are a great launching pad. And they turned me down 100 times. I had a Sundance T-shirt that I bought, I was just a visitor in the film festival. So every time I will submit a script for their lab, I will wear it and happy. The day they announce, I'm not there, of course. I take it all on the shirt. But eventually, now I read for them. Now I have a great relationship with Sundance. They knew me. Every cycle, there is a script from me coming back. So I think it is very important to always be persistent and believe in yourself and be open to people who are telling you this doesn't work or that doesn't works. It is because they know and they've seen a lot. So don't be so militant and married to your ideas. But that doesn't mean you lose your vision. Really understand what people know and work hard and be ready for it. It will pay off. I know it is the same advice you get, but it will pay off. It will pay off. But personally, that would happen with me.
100%. 100%. I think for me, because I'm a foreigner here, and whenever I take meetings or when I share my, my next projects and my visions, and when I go, I make sure that I know exactly what I'm talking about and the reason why this has to be mine, why I have to be the producer, and this why that I want to make this. And as more clear you are, more you're on top of everything, how you want to, do it, and just persistent. Just keep at it. People's gonna say no, but then somebody's gonna say yes. And believing in yourself is definitely very important. And everything she said, I don't have to say anything more. But good luck. Yeah, you can do it.
Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a high school student.
Oh,
and
cool.
I'm from China. So I have a question. If you have a friend, a teammate, work with you, they have a different opinion with you, and they don't want to make a film with you. How can you find a teammate or partner that can have a similar ideas about immigrant or other stuff about your film?
You guys want to go? I think for me it's always people. Even though the person has the greatest ideas, but then if the person is talking over you, are you a director or a producer, or what is your passion?
Director.
You're a director, okay. So if the cinematographer comes in and wants to help you, but then he has so much more ideas that you kind of shy away, and even though they come from the same country, may understand the same culture, but then you might want to think about it. It was is this the right person? Is this person's gonna support you creatively? Or can be an American person, but he'll be listening to you, or she'll be listening to you and can collaborate. So I don't think you should really too worry about collaborating with the same people, but really, listen to your heart and go with your guts, I think. And Anybody?
Being a director is managing crazy people, I have to tell you. On set, everybody's crazy and everybody's in everybody's business.
Yeah.
Learn to manage people, but also learn how to empower people. Filmmaking is about you are collaborating. You are not the best production designer in the world. You cannot produce. Maybe you have ideas. You can tell them to your production designer, but let them surprise you. Give them that lay of freedom. like to be a little bit creative and have ownership of their work. And the same goes with your custom designer and everybody. So, but you really need to manage them. It is really hard. It is, right? Like most of your time goes managing those people. Just like, hey, Tom, it's not your time now. Back. But if you do it with a lot of heart, they will love you and they will give everything for you. And that is what you want. You want the crew to strive for you because it is such a difficult. It's 12 hours working and people get tired and sometimes they just want to do anything to get like by. But you want them to reach a place where they are so invested and feel so respected that they want to give you their best.
Thank you.
I just learned too. Thank you.
But like, oh sorry. Can I ask other question? Like, how do you find like the when you're working on your film? Like, how do you find the people who you like work with?
How do you find your crew? Are you in film school or what?
Like when you make your film?
Making film, there is agencies. So you work, and it depends if you are making films in where. If you were making films, for example, in Richmond, in Virginia, for example, right? And because you have tax incentive, so you have to find a crew from there because they have money. They come with money attached to it. So it depends a lot. Finding a crew depends a lot of where you shoot, and if it is a co-production between Europe or where the money comes from. But there are a lot of agencies, and usually if you are a director and you have agents, within the agency they have below the line, they represent cinematographer, and that is when but in film school you will find a lot of your friends, a lot of people who, I don't know, I'm sure there are online sites where you look for we're talking about like us now who are making films, but when we started there's a lot of websites. Like if you are part of a lab or any kind of organization that supports filmmakers and stuff, you will hear calls. I was like, I'm looking for a DP, I'm looking for someone, and when they work without money, they just want their students and they want to help each other. So you really need to find those places.
Yeah, Facebook has a great, bunch of groups, and then also, I don't know if there's Mandy.com still exists, and if that's the case, like you can post, this is a story, what I want to make, and then there's I'm looking for a cinematographer, and people will say, I had my first short film I did as a student, my thesis film was from USC, and I had no money. It's like everything was just had to go into production. I had my credit card. Thanks, Mom. We're paying that credit card off. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I posted. I have no money to pay you, but this is the story that I'm passionate about. And a lot of people offered. A lot of people came to interviews. I met probably like 5-6 people each. And some of the cinematographer came in and said, I have red camera. I have all these lenses. I have all this equipment, and I'm gonna give this for free because I love your story. And that's how people are going to come. So when you meet those people, just be ready to tell them why you want to do it. And then, you don't just marry one person. If there's opportunity, meet a lot of people and talk to them and see how you feel, what their vision is, and how they're going to try to make your vision come true. Collaboration, so, yeah.
Berlin, for example, Berlin has the Berlinale Talent Campus, which is amazing because you will meet a lot of young people like yourself that you can work together, you grow together, you learn from each other. So you really need to find those pockets of where artists, where filmmakers gather. So you need to do your homework and try to find those places and plug yourself into them.
One last question.
Mahalo. Mahalo, HIFF, and mahalo, ladies, for just sharing your knowledge and yourselves with us today. Being a producer and Yonsei, our fourth generation Japanese American, being born and raised here, we have a lot of personal stories about our upbringing and our unique culture here. But I want to transcend the Pacific and share stories with my Japanese heritage or any other Pacific Island heritage. So I'm trying to, how do you ladies find your tribe, your audience? Because filmmaking is a business. So when you're trying to find financiers and you want to, tell them about your passion project, and they ask you, well, who's your audience? How are you going to make money? Who's going to see the movie? Those are all great questions. So do you have advice on how we could find, do you write for your audience? Do you write for yourselves? Because watching, especially foreign female-driven directed films, they seem very personal and very effective and affective, and that's very powerful. So how do you write it for yourselves and hope the movie will travel overseas, or do you just write for yourselves? how do you monetize your passion?
Can I go, Isabel? Yeah.
For me, because my goal as a filmmaker is to, I want to be known as an art house filmmaker. And that means, being able to come up with auteur-driven work that has a really unique and distinct voice. So I want to be able to premiere at the likes of Venice, Cannes, and Berlin. And those festivals like Cannes and Berlin especially are market festivals. So they're not just audiences and cinephiles, they're actually buyers and distributors going there. And the kinds of films that get programmed at those festivals are not necessarily the most commercial ones. I mean, you never find a Marvel movie premiering, in Cannes, but they're trying to find new directors and auteurs, have a unique sensibility. And so I think that's what, I'm able to do with a film like Lingua Franca. Like on paper, it sounds like a social issue movie. It touches on immigration and also on LGBTQ issues. But I think what people are coming away with is that it's, my film. It's a film that bears my unique stamp and sensibility as a director. And it's been picked up, say, in France and Israel, which are markets that are totally different from my experience and the theme of the film about a transgender Filipina in New York. So you just have, to have a distinct voice as a filmmaker that's unique enough and different enough from everything else in the marketplace. And for me, if I feel like I come up with a concept and a treatment for a film that's been done before, then I think that that's not worth making for me because, I want to really stand out as a filmmaker.
Yeah, so like echoing to something I said earlier, you're not trying, at this level, at the indie level, you're not trying to make a Marvel movie that's 4-quadrant, that will appeal to everyone. When you're making a movie for this sort of little money, I don't know if I'm the best person to speak to this because for both my features, like I had to self-finance most of it. But I was lucky with my first film in that it was able to make money and then I was able to finance the second one. But even in pitching to investors, they're not so much first of all, when they're investing in indie films like this, they have to be able to afford to lose all of it because they have to know the risk involved. So they're not really investing in your movie to necessarily make a fortune. They're not a studio. They're investing in you as a filmmaker if they believe in you. And if it's a story that you're really passionate about, don't try to make a movie about, I don't know, a guy with a dog who, it's like, oh, I'm trying to do this family film. Tell a story that is very personal to you, that you're very passionate about, and find someone who sees that passion in you. Not, well, how much will this movie make? So most of the time when I have found money from outside investors, it's because they believe in me as a filmmaker and they want to be part of that journey of sort of, they want to be part of my journey to becoming a filmmaker. On a more sort of selfish level, a lot of investors, they just see films as glamorous. They just want to be part of the action. I
haven't found those people yet. I only hear about them. Rich people want to mingle with the stars. I have the star. Where is the rich people?
Sometimes they just want to be invited to a film festival and walk the red carpet. Or if you have a semi-known actor, they just want to come on set and hang out with them and have lunch. And I'm not talking about Jennifer Lawrence. If you have a TV actor in your movie or whatever, there are sort of two different kind of investors, but all of those investors like indie films, none of them go in like, oh, I'm gonna make however much, you know, percentage of my investment back, because it's a very risky business, and they should know that going in.
But also there are, like, financing in the middle in America is very complicated because it is based on the studio system. But there are some pockets for financiers. Some you need to do as a producer. That is not our job as the directors. Thankfully, we don't. We sometimes beg for money, but it's not our primary job. But like there are like production companies like Macro that is based on diversity. They are looking for diverse stories, and they have a rich person somewhere gives them money. But there is a legitimate production company that their goal is to promote diversity. Their goal to promote this. Their goal to promote that. So, as a producer's job is to go and study that market. You need to study those because they are not very obvious. I work there and I know a lot of them, but I'm still surprised by how many companies like that I don't know about. How I don't know about this financier, or what I don't know about that financier, and how much this financier will cap. These people do like 3 to 4 million. These people will do that. They will not take a project that is less than 10 million. So you really need to know who are those places, and if you need to modify your script a little bit, it is both give and take if you want to have your filmmaking. And that is sometimes it is very important for directors not to be so like, this is the only thing I'm going to make. It is another voice of a person who has experience could elevate the story, could add another layer to it. So it is you really need to have that flexibility, which is not all letting go. You're just like, I'm going to do whatever they want for their money. No, but there is a place where you are flexible enough, and you need to do a lot of homework to find where are those financiers, who are they, what they're interested in, and all that. So it is a lot. Yeah, America is very complicated that way. Like in Europe, they have public money. You go there and fill a form.
So,
I think, sorry, no.
please, really quick.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think, I was talking to my producer, Shane, who's behind you, how amazing Hawaii is. And we really wanted to know about, like, the Japanese ancestry and how the history was. And I think you already have your original experience that I don't have as Japanese. And the people who doesn't have, you know what I'm saying? So, like, have that story that you want to share. And because that's your original idea, she talks about the, dogs and stuff, I think you can have a dog, but different, like your version of the dog in Hawaii, and but at the same time, it's what's most important is the story, I think, and then you have a passion and a back end, and like be prepared for your pitch and whatnot. Again, independent money is tight, but she's 100% right. They're not there to make money. They're hoping if it happens, great. If not. So just start calling all your rich friends and see if they can help you. That's what I did.
Believe me, this is a myth. This is a legend. I've never heard. That didn't work for me yet, that rich person. And I come from Saudi Arabia where there are lots of rich people.
So to round off our panel tonight, you will have all received a survey. If you'd be able to fill that out, that helps us as a festival program talks and make them that are relevant to you. But before we finish off, if you could just restate your name and then state how we can see your films next.
Haifaa Al-Mansour, and my film is playing
Right now.
10 minutes.
in 10 minutes in the next theater.
My name is HIKARI, and my film is going to be playing at what time? 2 o'clock today. It's already past 2 o'clock. All right. Well, it's going to be on Netflix eventually next year. Sometime.
There's actually another screening tomorrow night.
Oh, hey, watch it in this big screen. Don't wait because we don't know when the Netflix is. But tomorrow night, the sound is amazing, so watch it in the theater if you can.
I'm Jenny Dorsey, and you can follow along my nonprofit. It's called Studio Atao. That's spelled ATAO. And we are touring Asian in America. HIFF was our final stop for this year, but we'll be restarting in Los Angeles in 2020 on January 23rd at the Japanese American National Museum.
My name is Emily Ting, and I'm the director of Go Back to China. We have two screenings at HIFF, one tonight 6:45, and one tomorrow at 4:30, 4 something here. But we're also going to come out on VOD in early 2020. So if you follow us on social media, we'll have more information once we know the exact release date.
I'm Isabel Sandoval. I'm the director of Lingua Franca. We just had our 2 screenings at HIFF earlier this week. We're currently touring international and US festivals.